The grand ballroom of the Sterling Heights Hotel shimmered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast dazzling reflections on polished marble floors, while elegantly dressed guests mingled beneath them, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries. This was the annual business gala hosted by Forbes and Daniels Holdings, a high-stakes event where deals were brokered over cocktails and alliances were tested with subtle glances. Daniel Reed adjusted his cufflinks and surveyed the room with a practiced eye. As co-founder of Reed and Hayes Industries, he was no stranger to events like this. He had built his company from the ground up, turning it into a powerhouse in the tech sector. Tonight was supposed to be about expanding partnerships, strengthening his business network, and celebrating another successful year. But something felt off, an itch in the back of his mind that he couldn't shake. It wasn't the usual corporate tension that came with these gatherings. It was something deeper, something personal. He was about to find out just how personal. The sound of laughter caught Daniel's attention as he passed by the terrace doors. He recognized the voice immediately, Graham Hayes, his business partner and longtime friend. Graham stood near the edge of the terrace, surrounded by a small group of investors and executives. Daniel was about to join them when Graham's next words stopped him cold. "Fatherhood's a funny thing," Graham was saying, his voice tinged with smug amusement. "You spend years in the background, knowing the truth but keeping it quiet. Sometimes you watch another man raise your kids thinking they're his." The group chuckled politely, but Daniel froze in place, his mind racing. What the hell is he talking about? "I'll tell you this," Graham continued, lowering his voice slightly but not enough to escape Daniel's ears. "Daniel Reed might be a business genius, but when it comes to his personal life, well, let's just say he's been blind for a long time." The laughter grew quieter, replaced by murmurs of unease. Even the other executives seemed uncertain about how far Graham was willing to take his boast. Daniel's vision blurred with anger as the words sank in. He's talking about Olivia and the kids. His wife, Olivia, and their 2 children, Ben and Sophie, were the center of his world. The idea that Graham, his trusted partner, could be insinuating something so vile and personal was unthinkable. But the truth was suddenly impossible to ignore. Daniel retreated into the shadows of the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath him. Had he really been blind all these years? Were his children not his own? The thought was unbearable. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe slowly. Losing control here, in front of hundreds of powerful industry leaders, would be a disaster. He couldn't afford an emotional outburst. If Graham was bold enough to make such claims in public, Daniel needed to approach this with strategy, not rage. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to his lawyer, Sarah Grayson. "We need to talk. Urgent. I'm sending a recording tonight." His instincts as a businessman kicked in, overriding the storm of emotions in his mind. If Graham wanted to play dirty, Daniel would meet him on a battlefield he knew all too well, one of evidence, contracts, and legal warfare. He quietly activated his phone's voice recorder and moved closer to the terrace, staying out of sight but within earshot. The conversation continued, with Graham making veiled references to secrets within the company and his long-standing friendship with Olivia. "You know," Graham said with a chuckle, "sometimes partnerships aren't just about business. Sometimes they go deeper." One of the executives laughed nervously. "Sounds risky. Mixing business with personal matters can blow up in your face." Graham smirked. "Only if you get caught. But I've always been a few steps ahead. Daniel doesn't even suspect a thing." The arrogance in Graham's tone made Daniel's stomach turn. He forced himself to stay calm, listening carefully as Graham spoke. Every word was a potential weapon, ammunition for the battle that lay ahead. Daniel needed more than hearsay. He needed hard evidence. "Anyway," Graham continued, "let's move on to business. Enough about Reed and his perfect little family." Daniel ended the recording and slipped his phone back into his pocket. He had heard enough for tonight. He quietly left the hallway and made his way toward the exit, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might recognize him. His mind was already formulating the next steps. By the time he reached his car, Daniel's fury had crystallized into cold determination. Graham had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a declaration of war. As he drove through the city streets, Daniel thought about his children. Ben was 10 years old, bright and curious, with a knack for building things just like his father. Sophie, at 7, had a talent for storytelling and could charm anyone with her imagination. They were his world. Whether or not Graham's insinuations had any truth to them, Daniel would fight to protect his family. He pulled into the driveway of his suburban mansion and turned off the engine. The house was dark, save for a few lights in the living room. Olivia was likely waiting up for him. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to face her. But there would be time for confrontation later. First, he needed to prepare. He sent the recorded audio to Sarah with a note. "Get a team ready. We're going after him, personally and professionally." Daniel stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door. The game had changed, but one thing was certain: Graham Hayes had made a fatal mistake by underestimating him. This battle was only just beginning. The house was eerily quiet when Daniel entered. The faint glow of a lamp in the living room cast long shadows across the polished wood floors. Olivia sat on the couch, her legs curled beneath her, a book resting on her lap. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "You're home early," she said softly. "I thought the gala would keep you out late." Daniel managed a tight smile, masking the storm of emotions raging within him. "Something came up. I wasn't really in the mood to stick around." Olivia tilted her head, her expression curious but not suspicious. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," Daniel lied, walking over to kiss her on the forehead. "Just a long day." He couldn't confront her yet, not without knowing more. If there was any truth to what Graham had implied, Daniel needed hard evidence before he could take any action. The last thing he wanted was to be blindsided by denial or manipulation. This had to be handled strategically. "I think I'll turn in early," he said, loosening his tie. "We'll catch up tomorrow." "Okay," Olivia replied, watching him carefully. "Good night." "Good night," Daniel said, heading upstairs to his office. As soon as he closed the door behind him, he let out a shaky breath. His hands trembled slightly as he leaned against the desk. For years, he had built his empire on the foundation of trust, both in business and in his personal life. Now that foundation felt like it was crumbling beneath his feet. But he wouldn't let it collapse. Not without a fight. An hour later, Sarah Grayson called. Daniel answered immediately, pacing the room as she spoke. "I listened to the recording," Sarah began. "It's incriminating, but it's not enough to take him down in court. You need more, something concrete that proves his involvement in both your personal and corporate matters." "I figured as much," Daniel said. "What do you suggest?" "We'll need a multi-pronged approach," Sarah explained. "First, I'll dig into Graham's financial records. If he's been leveraging company assets or engaging in any shady deals, we'll find it. Second, you should consider a paternity test for your children." Daniel's throat tightened at the suggestion. The idea of questioning his connection to Ben and Sophie felt like a betrayal in itself. But he knew Sarah was right. If he wanted to protect them, and secure his position in any legal battle, he needed clarity. "All right," he said quietly. "But I want it done discreetly. I don't want Olivia or the kids to know yet." "Understood. I'll reach out to a private testing lab," Sarah said. "In the meantime, I'll also start building a case for corporate misconduct. If Graham has been embezzling or manipulating contracts, we'll use that to corner him." Daniel nodded, feeling a glimmer of control return. "Thank you, Sarah. I knew I could count on you." "Hang in there, Daniel. We'll get through this," she reassured him before hanging up. The next few days were a blur of calculated moves and tense silence. Daniel maintained his usual routine, attending meetings and managing the company as if nothing were wrong. But beneath the surface, every interaction with Graham was charged with unspoken animosity. At one board meeting, Graham presented a new partnership proposal with his usual charm, oblivious to the fact that Daniel was already laying the groundwork to dismantle his empire. "Excellent work, as always," Graham said with a grin as the meeting concluded. "We're really going to make waves with this deal." Daniel forced a smile in return. "Of course. We're a great team." Not for long, Daniel thought, his gaze cold and calculating. Meanwhile, the private investigation into Graham's activities began yielding results. Sarah updated Daniel regularly, revealing a trail of questionable transactions and hidden accounts tied to Graham's name. "He's been siphoning company funds into offshore accounts for years," Sarah informed him during a late-night call. "It's subtle, but it's there. We're also finding irregularities in some of the contracts he negotiated. This could give you leverage both in court and in a shareholder meeting." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Perfect. Let's keep building the case. I want every skeleton in his closet brought to light." "Will do," Sarah said. "And one more thing, we have the preliminary results from the paternity test. You might want to sit down for this." Daniel's stomach twisted. He lowered himself into his office chair, gripping the armrests tightly. "Go on. Both children are yours," Sarah said gently. The relief that washed over him was overwhelming. He closed his eyes, exhaling a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The fear that Graham might have been their biological father had gnawed at him for days, but now that fear was gone. "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice hoarse. "At least I know that much." "I thought you'd want to hear that first," Sarah said. "Now you can focus on the corporate side without that weighing you down." "I will," Daniel replied. "And Sarah, let's make sure Graham regrets every word he spoke at that gala. Consider it done." With the paternity issue resolved, Daniel's focus sharpened. His children were his, and he would do whatever it took to protect their future. Graham had underestimated him, thinking his arrogance and secrets would remain hidden forever. But Daniel had spent his entire career outmaneuvering powerful opponents. This was no different. The trap was being set, and soon, Graham Hayes would have nowhere to run. Daniel spent the next week quietly but methodically setting his plan into motion. Every piece of evidence against Graham Hayes was being compiled and organized by Sarah's team. Financial records, questionable contracts, and internal communications, all of it painted a damning picture of Graham's betrayal on both a personal and professional level. But Daniel knew that legal battles were not only fought with evidence. Perception mattered too. He needed the company's board of directors and key stakeholders on his side when the truth came to light. If Graham suspected what was coming, he might attempt to manipulate the narrative or even flee with what he had stolen. This was going to be a battle on multiple fronts: corporate, legal, and psychological. And Daniel intended to win on all counts. On Thursday morning, Daniel called a meeting with two of the company's senior board members, Margaret Lynn and Peter Caldwell. Both were seasoned executives with decades of experience and had been instrumental in helping Daniel and Graham grow the business in its early years. As they settled into the conference room, Margaret gave Daniel a curious look. "You sounded urgent on the phone. Is something wrong?" "Let's just say I've uncovered some serious misconduct within the company," Daniel replied, locking eyes with both of them. "I need your support when I present this to the full board next week." Peter frowned. "Misconduct? Are we talking about financial issues?" Daniel nodded. "Graham Hayes has been embezzling funds and manipulating contracts for personal gain. I have the evidence to prove it." Margaret's eyes widened in shock. "Graham? Are you sure? He's been with you since the beginning. This is a serious accusation. I wouldn't bring this to you unless I was absolutely certain," Daniel said firmly. He slid a folder across the table, containing a summary of the evidence. "Take a look for yourselves. I'm not just talking about minor discrepancies. This goes deep, and it's been happening for years." The room fell into silence as Margaret and Peter began reviewing the documents. Peter's jaw tightened as he flipped through the pages. Damn it. If this is true, it's not just criminal, it's a breach of trust at the highest level. "It is," Daniel agreed. Which is why I need your backing. Graham will fight to protect himself, but if the board stands united, we can remove him from his position and pursue legal action. Margaret set the folder down with a sigh. You'll have my support, Daniel. Betrayal like this can't be tolerated. Mine as well, Peter added. But we need to be strategic about this. If Graham catches wind of what's coming, he might try to destroy evidence or manipulate public perception. That's why I want to keep this under wraps until the meeting, Daniel said. Sarah Grayson and her team are preparing everything for the legal proceedings. I'll make my case to the board, and once we've voted on his removal, the rest will fall into place. Later that day, Daniel received a call from Sarah. We've got another development, she said. One of our investigators found that Graham has been in contact with a journalist, someone from the Business Ledger. He might be trying to control the narrative ahead of time. Daniel's jaw tightened. Of course he is. He's probably planning to paint himself as the victim and me as the aggressor. That's what it looks like, Sarah agreed. We've already intercepted a few emails. He's hinting at irreconcilable differences with his business partner and plans to spin the story as a personal feud. He's trying to downplay the financial misconduct. Not surprising, Daniel muttered. But he won't get away with it. Do we have enough to counter his narrative? Absolutely, Sarah said confidently. Once we present the evidence, any attempt at a smear campaign will crumble. But you need to be ready for him to go on the offensive. I'm ready, Daniel said. Let him make his move. The truth will destroy him. The next few days were tense, but Daniel remained composed. He played his role perfectly, attending meetings, shaking hands, and keeping up appearances. Graham was none the wiser, still carrying himself with the same arrogant swagger that had become his trademark. At one point, they crossed paths in the company's executive lounge. Graham flashed a grin and clapped Daniel on the shoulder. Big meeting next week, huh? Graham said casually. Got any surprises planned? Daniel met his gaze with an icy smile. You'll just have to wait and see. Graham chuckled, oblivious to the double meaning. Fair enough. You've always loved your big reveals. Looking forward to it. So am I, Daniel replied smoothly before walking away. The encounter only solidified his resolve. Graham had no idea what was coming, but soon, his world would come crashing down. On the night before the board meeting, Daniel sat in his office, going over the final details with Sarah. Everything was in place. The evidence was airtight, the board members had been briefed, and the legal paperwork was ready to be filed. You've got this, Sarah said, her tone reassuring. By this time tomorrow, Graham will be out of the company and facing criminal charges. Daniel nodded, his gaze hard. He thought he could betray me and walk away unscathed. He's about to learn just how wrong he was. As the call ended, Daniel leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a moment of reflection. The man he had once trusted like a brother had become his greatest enemy. But Daniel wasn't the same man Graham had underestimated. He was stronger, smarter, and more prepared than ever. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it. The boardroom of Reed and Hayes Industries was spacious and imposing, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the room, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. One by one, the board members filed in, murmuring among themselves as they settled into their seats. This was no ordinary meeting, and the tension was palpable. Daniel stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back as he waited for the proceedings to begin. He had prepared for this moment meticulously. Everything hinged on the next few hours. If the board backed him, Graham Hayes would be stripped of his power, and the company's integrity would be restored. If they hesitated or divided, however, Graham might use the confusion to his advantage. The doors opened again, and Graham strode in, all confidence and charm. He wore a tailored gray suit, and carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. He flashed his trademark smile, greeting the board members as if he were hosting a casual networking event. Good morning, everyone, Graham said cheerfully. Looks like we've got a full house today. That's always a good sign. Daniel turned to face him, his expression calm but unreadable. Good morning, Graham. I hope you're ready for what's ahead. Graham chuckled, oblivious to the underlying threat in Daniel's words. Always am, partner. Always am. Not for long, Daniel thought, his eyes narrowing slightly. Margaret Lynn, the board's vice chair, called the meeting to order. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. We have some important matters to discuss today, including a serious issue that's been brought to our attention regarding company leadership. Graham raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Serious issue? You've piqued my curiosity, Margaret. What's this all about? Daniel stepped forward, placing a stack of documents on the table. His voice was steady and authoritative. It's about you, Graham. Specifically, your long-term pattern of financial misconduct, manipulation of contracts, and breach of fiduciary duty. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Graham, whose confident facade faltered for a split second before he recovered. Financial misconduct? Graham repeated, feigning shock. Daniel, that's a pretty heavy accusation. I hope you're not jumping to conclusions based on bad information. I'm not jumping to anything, Daniel replied coldly. I have the evidence to back it up. These documents detail your embezzlement of company funds, hidden offshore accounts, and irregularities in several major contracts you negotiated. Sarah Grayson's legal team has verified every detail. Margaret and Peter nodded in agreement, reinforcing Daniel's claims. Graham's smile tightened. Oh, I see. This is a setup. You've been planning this, haven't you? Trying to push me out so you can take full control of the company. This isn't about control, Daniel said firmly. It's about accountability. You betrayed this company and the people who trusted you. And now you're going to face the consequences. Graham's eyes darted around the room, gauging the reactions of the other board members. He could see the doubt and suspicion in their faces. The weight of the evidence was already tilting the balance against him. Come on, people, Graham said, trying to regain control of the narrative. You've known me for years. You really think I'd risk everything by stealing from my own company? This is a smear campaign, plain and simple. Daniel's just bitter because of personal issues between us. Personal issues? Daniel repeated with a raised eyebrow. You mean your lies and manipulation? Let's not forget your attempt to discredit me at the gala by boasting about your supposed involvement with my family. I have that on record too. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. The mention of personal betrayal added another layer to the scandal. Margaret leaned forward, her expression stern. Graham, these are serious allegations with substantial evidence behind them, she said. If you have any counter-evidence to refute the claims, now's the time to present it. Graham opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He had been caught off guard, blindsided by the sheer thoroughness of Daniel's preparation. He had no counter-evidence, no alibi, only bluster and denial. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. This is a damn witch hunt, he muttered under his breath. Call it what you want, Daniel said, his voice sharp. But the facts speak for themselves. I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Graham Hayes from his position as co-founder and chief financial officer. The board will also authorize a full investigation into his activities and pursue legal action if necessary. Margaret nodded. All those in favor? Hands rose around the table, one after another, until a majority was reached. Graham's face darkened as the reality of his downfall set in. The motion carries, Margaret announced. Effective immediately, Graham Hayes is removed from his position. The room buzzed with murmurs as the decision was finalized. Graham stood abruptly, his face a mask of barely contained fury. This isn't over, he hissed at Daniel. You think you've won, but I'll find a way to fight back. You're going to regret this. Daniel met his glare without flinching. The only thing I regret is trusting you in the first place. Now get out of my company. Graham hesitated for a moment before turning on his heel and storming out of the boardroom. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving an eerie silence in his wake. Peter cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Well, I'd say that was long overdue. Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of the confrontation finally lifting from his shoulders. Thank you for your support. We've got a lot of cleanup to do, but at least the worst is behind us. Margaret offered him a reassuring smile. You did the right thing, Daniel. The company is stronger for it. As the meeting adjourned, Daniel allowed himself a rare moment of relief. The battle was far from over. Graham would undoubtedly try to retaliate, but for now, Daniel had won the first major victory. And he wasn't going to stop until every loose end was tied. The aftermath of Graham's removal sent shockwaves through the company and the business world at large. Within hours, news of the board's decision broke across multiple media outlets. Headlines ranged from sensational to damning. Reed and Hayes CFO ousted in corporate scandal. Internal betrayal. Financial misconduct rocks tech giant. Graham Hayes accused of embezzlement. Legal proceedings imminent. Reporters swarmed the company's headquarters the next morning, eager for comments from Daniel and other executives. Sarah advised him to keep public statements brief and measured. Stick to the facts, she told him over a call. Acknowledge the situation, assure stakeholders that corrective measures are in place, and avoid personal attacks. We don't want to give Graham any ammunition. Daniel agreed. The last thing he wanted was to get dragged into a public mudslinging match. He needed to project stability and control. At a hastily arranged press conference, Daniel stood behind a podium flanked by Margaret and Peter. Cameras flashed incessantly as reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping in a chaotic frenzy. Daniel raised a hand, signaling for quiet. Good morning, he began, his tone calm and authoritative. As you are all aware, Reed and Hayes Industries has recently undergone a significant leadership change. After a thorough investigation, the board of directors determined that Graham Hayes engaged in serious financial misconduct that compromised the integrity of our operations. As a result, Mr. Hayes has been removed from his position, effective immediately. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks as Daniel continued. We understand that this news may raise concerns among our clients, partners, and shareholders. Let me assure you that the company remains strong and committed to transparency. We have implemented new oversight protocols to prevent future breaches of trust, and we are cooperating fully with legal authorities. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Mr. Reed, how do you respond to claims that this decision was motivated by personal conflicts between you and Mr. Hayes? Daniel's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. This decision was based solely on evidence of misconduct. Personal matters had no bearing on the board's actions. Our priority is the health and integrity of the company. Another reporter chimed in. Is it true that you and Mr. Hayes were longtime friends and business partners? How did you not notice the misconduct sooner? Daniel exhaled slowly. He had anticipated this question. Trust is a cornerstone of any successful partnership, he said carefully. Unfortunately, that trust was violated. I accept responsibility for not recognizing the warning signs earlier, but the important thing is that we have taken decisive action to protect the company. Satisfied for the moment, the reporters shifted their focus to Margaret and Peter, allowing Daniel to step back from the podium. As he listened to the remaining questions, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The hard part was far from over, but he had weathered the first storm. Later that evening, Daniel returned home and found Olivia waiting for him in the living room. She looked tense, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The media coverage had been relentless, and Daniel knew she was struggling to process everything. I saw the press conference, she said quietly as he entered. It must have been brutal. It wasn't fun, Daniel admitted, loosening his tie and sitting across from her. But it had to be done. Olivia hesitated for a moment before speaking again. This whole thing with Graham. I still can't believe it. We both trusted him for so many years. How did it get to this point? Daniel studied her carefully. He hadn't confronted her directly about the conversation he had overheard at the gala, but the time for silence was over. If they were going to move forward, the truth had to come out. Olivia, there's something I need to ask you, he said, his voice steady but firm. When Graham made those comments at the gala, about fatherhood and secrets, what was he talking about? Her eyes widened in shock. Wait, you heard that? I heard enough, Daniel said, his gaze unrelenting. He was boasting about things that sounded very personal, things involving you and our family. I need to know the truth. Olivia shook her head vehemently. Daniel, I swear to you, there's nothing between me and Graham. He's a liar and a manipulator. I don't know why he said those things, but they're not true. Daniel wanted to believe her. The relief he had felt when the paternity tests confirmed Ben and Sophie were his had been overwhelming. But there was still a part of him that needed full clarity. Then why would he make those insinuations? Daniel pressed. He acted like he had some kind of power over us. Olivia's expression darkened. Because that's who he is. He thrives on control and intimidation. Maybe he thought making those remarks would undermine you, make you question me and the life we've built. But I promise you, Daniel, I've never betrayed you. Daniel searched her eyes for any hint of deception but found none. The sincerity in her voice was undeniable. He exhaled slowly, letting some of the tension ease from his shoulders. All right, he said quietly. I believe you. But from now on, we're not letting anyone come between us, especially not someone like Graham. Olivia nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Agreed. We've been through enough already. As the days passed, Daniel continued to fortify both his personal and professional life. Graham, true to form, tried to stir public sympathy by granting a sensationalized interview to a business magazine. He painted himself as a scapegoat, claiming that internal rivalries had led to his downfall. But the evidence against him was too overwhelming, and his narrative quickly crumbled under scrutiny. Meanwhile, Sarah's legal team filed a series of lawsuits against Graham, freezing his assets and securing court orders for further investigations. Every move Daniel made tightened the noose around his former partner's neck. The battle wasn't over yet, but Daniel knew he was winning. It didn't take long for Graham Hayes to launch a full-scale counterattack. Despite being disgraced and removed from his position, he still had influence, and he intended to use every ounce of it. Within days of the board's decision, he filed a lawsuit against Daniel and Reed and Hayes Industries, claiming wrongful termination and defamation. His legal team argued that Daniel had orchestrated a smear campaign driven by personal vendettas. The lawsuit quickly became a media sensation. Headlines screamed of betrayal, corporate infighting, and dirty secrets. Pundits debated on business news programs whether Daniel had gone too far or if Graham's downfall was a necessary act of corporate justice. Daniel watched the coverage with a mixture of anger and exasperation. He knew Graham was trying to control the narrative by painting himself as a victim, but he also knew that public perception could sway even the most logical minds. Shareholders were beginning to voice concerns, and clients were growing anxious about the company's stability. Sarah Grayson was unfazed. "This is exactly what I expected him to do," she said during a meeting with Daniel and the executive team. "Graham's strategy is to cast doubt on your integrity and buy himself time. But he doesn't have the evidence to support his claims." "We do." Peter Caldwell leaned forward, frowning. "But what about the court of public opinion? He's got the media eating out of his hand." "We'll fight back," Sarah assured him. "I've already lined up interviews with credible business journalists who've reviewed the evidence. We'll provide a clear timeline of events and emphasize the legal proceedings. Once people see the facts, Graham's credibility will erode." Daniel nodded. "Good. I want the truth out there. We can't let him manipulate the situation." "Just be prepared," Sarah added. "This isn't going to be a quick resolution. Graham thrives on dragging things out. He'll look for every opportunity to stall and twist the facts." Daniel exhaled deeply. He was tired of the games, but he wasn't about to back down. Graham had already taken too much from him: his trust, his peace of mind, and the stability of the company. Daniel was determined to see this through to the end. As the legal battle escalated, Daniel found himself grappling with another challenge: keeping his family shielded from the fallout. Reporters had started circling their home, hoping for comments or glimpses of a scandal. Olivia was growing increasingly anxious, and the children were beginning to sense that something was wrong. "Daddy, why are there so many cameras outside?" Sophie asked one evening as they sat in the living room. Her wide, innocent eyes filled with confusion. "It's just people being nosy," Daniel said gently. "They're interested in my work, but it'll go away soon. You don't need to worry about it." "But they're scaring Mommy," Sophie said quietly. "She keeps looking out the window a lot." Daniel's heart sank. He hated that his children were being affected by Graham's actions. He pulled Sophie into a comforting hug. "I'll take care of it, sweetheart. I promise." Later that night, he spoke with Olivia about hiring private security to keep the media at bay. She agreed, though her frustration was evident. "We didn't ask for any of this," she said bitterly. "Graham's the one who made those choices. Why should we have to suffer for it?" "We won't suffer for long," Daniel replied. "I'll make sure of it." The turning point came 2 weeks later when Sarah arranged a televised interview for Daniel with a respected business journalist. The goal was to present the evidence clearly and dispel the rumors Graham had been spreading. As the cameras rolled, Daniel maintained a composed but firm demeanor. "Mr. Reed," the journalist began, "Graham Hayes has accused you of orchestrating a personal vendetta against him. He claims that your decision to remove him was motivated by jealousy and internal rivalry. How do you respond to those allegations?" Daniel met the journalist's gaze without hesitation. "Those claims are baseless. This decision was not personal. It was based on clear evidence of financial misconduct. We uncovered a pattern of embezzlement, fraudulent contracts, and hidden accounts. Our legal team has verified every detail, and the board acted unanimously to protect the company." "And what about your long-standing partnership with Mr. Hayes?" the journalist asked. "How did it feel to discover that someone you trusted had betrayed you?" Daniel paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "It was devastating," he admitted. "Graham and I built this company together. I trusted him not just as a business partner but as a friend. Learning that he had been deceiving me for years was one of the hardest things I've ever faced. But as a leader, I had a responsibility to act. My loyalty is to the company and the people who depend on it." The journalist nodded thoughtfully. "Some critics have pointed to personal tensions between you and Mr. Hayes. How do you separate personal matters from professional decisions in a case like this?" "By focusing on facts," Daniel replied. "Personal tensions may exist, but they don't change the evidence. The financial records speak for themselves. Graham Hayes violated the trust of this company, and that's why he was removed." The interview aired later that night, drawing praise from both the media and the business community. Analysts noted that Daniel had come across as credible and composed, while Graham's claims were beginning to lose traction. The next morning, Daniel received a call from Sarah. "Good news," she said. "Several key shareholders have expressed renewed confidence in your leadership. They were impressed by the interview and are backing the company's legal actions against Graham. He's losing support." Daniel allowed himself a rare smile. "That's what I wanted to hear. How's Graham responding?" "He's panicking," Sarah replied. "His legal team is already trying to negotiate a settlement. They know he doesn't have a leg to stand on. Let them sweat for a while," Daniel said. "We're not rushing into anything. I want him to feel the full weight of what he's done." Sarah chuckled. "Now you're thinking like a strategist." The tide was turning. The lies Graham had built his defense on were beginning to crumble, and Daniel was finally gaining the upper hand. But the battle wasn't over yet. He had one more move to make, a decisive strike that would end Graham's campaign of deception once and for all. With the momentum shifting in his favor, Daniel knew it was time to deliver the final blow. Graham's credibility had taken a beating in the media, but he was still clinging to the lawsuit like a life raft. His strategy was clear: delay, mislead, and negotiate from a position of weakness while publicly playing the victim. Daniel had no intention of letting that happen. Sarah met with him in his office to discuss their next steps. Her legal team had uncovered additional evidence that could tip the scales even further. It wasn't just financial misconduct anymore. They had proof of Graham's coercive tactics, including his attempts to intimidate lower-level employees and manipulate key contracts. "We've found several employees who are willing to testify," Sarah explained, sliding a file across Daniel's desk. They were pressured by Graham into approving questionable deals. Some of them were even threatened with retaliation if they refused. Daniel flipped through the file, his expression darkening with each page. "He's not just a thief, he's a bully. How the hell did I miss this for so long?" "You trusted him," Sarah said gently. "And he knew how to hide his tracks. But that's over now. We can use this testimony to build an airtight case. Once we present it to the court, Graham will have no choice but to back down." Daniel nodded. "Good. I want him to feel the walls closing in on him. There's also another option," Sarah continued. "We could offer him a settlement, but on our terms. He forfeits any remaining claims against the company, drops the lawsuit, and agrees to a lifetime non-compete clause. In exchange, we'll reduce the penalties he's facing." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You think he'll take it?" "He might, once he realizes he's out of options," Sarah replied. "It's a way to end this quickly without dragging it through a lengthy trial." Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering the proposal. Part of him wanted to see Graham humiliated in court, forced to face the consequences of his actions in the harshest possible way. But another part of him, the pragmatic businessman, recognized the value of a swift resolution. The longer this dragged on, the more distractions it would create for the company and his family. "Let's give him the offer," Daniel said after a moment. "But make it clear that it's a one-time deal. If he rejects it, we'll bring the full weight of the evidence against him in court." Sarah smiled. "Understood. I'll have the papers drawn up by the end of the day." Later that evening, Daniel received a text from Olivia, "Dinner's ready. We need to talk." The simple message sent a shiver of unease through him. Since their conversation about Graham's remarks at the gala, things had been tense between them. Olivia had insisted that there was no truth to Graham's claims, but the damage to their trust had left a lingering strain on their relationship. When Daniel entered the dining room, he found Olivia setting plates on the table. The children had already eaten and gone to bed, leaving the two of them alone. She gave him a tentative smile as he sat down. "How was your day?" she asked. "Productive," Daniel replied. "We're making progress on the case. Sarah's team found more evidence against Graham. We're close to shutting him down for good." Olivia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's good. I know how much this has weighed on you." "It's weighed on all of us," Daniel said softly. "I hate that you and the kids have been caught in the middle of this." Olivia hesitated, then reached across the table to take his hand. "Daniel, I know we've been through a lot. But I need you to believe me, I never gave Graham any reason to think he had power over us. He's a manipulative liar. Whatever he said at the gala was meant to hurt you." Daniel studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. But all he saw was sincerity and pain. He squeezed her hand gently. "I do believe you. I was just scared. Scared that I might lose everything I care about." "You won't," Olivia whispered. "We're in this together. No one's going to tear us apart." For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a sense of peace settle over him. The wounds caused by Graham's betrayal wouldn't heal overnight, but they were beginning to mend. The next day, Sarah's team delivered the settlement offer to Graham's lawyers. The response came quicker than expected. Graham wanted a private meeting with Daniel to discuss the terms. "He's desperate," Sarah said when she informed Daniel. "But that doesn't mean he won't try to pull something." "I'm ready," Daniel replied. "Let him have his meeting. It'll be the last time he ever tries to manipulate me." The meeting took place in a neutral office downtown. Graham arrived looking disheveled and tense, a far cry from the polished executive he had once been. He gave Daniel a forced smile as they sat across from each other in a conference room. "Daniel," Graham began, his tone conciliatory, "we don't have to let this get any uglier than it already has. We were partners for years, friends. Surely, we can find a way to resolve this without tearing each other apart. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes cold. You did this to yourself, Graham. You stole from the company, betrayed my trust, and tried to smear me when I exposed you. You don't get to play the victim now. Graham's smile faltered. I made mistakes, okay? But we can still salvage something. I'll accept the settlement, but I want some concessions. No, Daniel interrupted, his voice sharp. You have no leverage. Either you take the deal as it stands, or we go to court and I bury you. Those are your only options. For a moment, Graham stared at him, the weight of his defeat sinking in. Finally, he sighed and nodded. Fine. I'll sign. Daniel stood, towering over him. Good. This is the last time we'll ever speak. You're finished, Graham. Graham said nothing as Daniel walked out, leaving him to face the wreckage of his own making. The ink on the settlement papers had barely dried when news broke that Graham Hayes had withdrawn his lawsuit. The announcement sent shockwaves through the media, with journalists scrambling to analyze the sudden turn of events. For weeks, Graham had portrayed himself as a victim of corporate betrayal, but his abrupt capitulation painted a very different picture. Graham Hayes agrees to confidential settlement amid mounting evidence of misconduct. Reed and Hayes Industries emerges victorious in legal dispute. Daniel Reed restores stability after scandal. For Daniel, the news felt like a weight being lifted off his shoulders. The storm that had threatened to destroy his career, his company, and his family was finally passing. But he knew that his work wasn't finished. Rebuilding trust, with both the company and those closest to him, was a process that would take time. At headquarters, the atmosphere was cautiously optimistic. Employees who had been walking on eggshells throughout the ordeal were beginning to relax. The executive team held a meeting to discuss next steps, focusing on restoring the company's reputation and reassuring clients and partners. We need to double down on transparency, Margaret Lynn said. Public trust is fragile right now. We should hold regular updates for stakeholders and emphasize our new oversight protocols. I agree, Peter Caldwell added. This is an opportunity to strengthen the company's foundation. People need to see that we've learned from this. Daniel nodded, listening intently. Let's move forward with those plans. We've survived the worst of it, but we need to stay proactive. I want Reed and Hayes to come out of this stronger than ever. The team exchanged nods of agreement. Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. The company wasn't just his legacy, it was a testament to years of hard work and sacrifice. He wasn't going to let Graham's betrayal define it. Later that day, Daniel met with Sarah in her office to review the final details of the settlement. Graham had agreed to every term, including the non-compete clause that effectively barred him from working in the tech industry for the rest of his life. His assets were frozen pending further investigations, and he had forfeited any remaining shares in the company. He's done, Sarah said, closing the file with a satisfied expression. There's no coming back from this. Good, Daniel replied. It's what he deserves. There is one more thing, though, Sarah added. The employees who came forward to testify against him, they've expressed concerns about retaliation. Even though Graham's out of the picture, they're worried about their careers. Daniel frowned. We can't let them face any consequences for doing the right thing. Make sure they're protected. Promotions, transfers, whatever it takes to secure their futures. I'll take care of it, Sarah promised. Daniel appreciated her thoroughness. Throughout the ordeal, Sarah had been a steadfast ally, guiding him through every legal minefield. He owed much of his victory to her expertise and dedication. At home, the atmosphere had improved significantly. The media presence outside the house had dwindled, and Olivia was visibly more relaxed. They spent more time together as a family, enjoying quiet evenings with the kids and putting the chaos behind them. One weekend, Daniel and Olivia took Ben and Sophie to the park for a picnic. The children ran ahead, laughing and chasing each other across the open field. Daniel watched them with a sense of profound gratitude. No matter how close he had come to losing everything, his family had endured. Olivia sat beside him on the blanket, her hand resting on his. "It feels good to breathe again," she said softly. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "I almost forgot what peace felt like." "You've been through so much, Daniel," she continued. "But you didn't let it break you. I'm proud of you." He smiled at her, squeezing her hand gently. "I couldn't have done it without you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play. For the first time in months, Daniel allowed himself to relax fully. The war was over, and he had emerged victorious, not just in the courtroom, but in reclaiming his life. But victory had its complexities. Over the next few weeks, Daniel received a series of messages from former acquaintances and business partners who had distanced themselves during the scandal. Now that Graham had been discredited, they were eager to rekindle their relationships with him. "Daniel, congratulations on the win. Let's catch up soon. I knew you'd pull through. Let me know how I can support you moving forward." Daniel read the messages with a mixture of amusement and disdain. Many of these people had been conspicuously absent when things were at their worst. Now they wanted to ride the wave of his success. He replied to only a few trusted contacts, choosing to be selective about who he allowed back into his circle. He had learned a valuable lesson about loyalty. True allies were rare, and he intended to keep those who had stood by him close, people like Sarah, Margaret, and Peter. The rest could stay on the periphery. One evening, Daniel received a message from Liam, his younger brother. The scandal had brought up painful memories of previous betrayals, and their relationship had been strained for years. Liam's message was brief but sincere. "Hey, I saw the news. I'm proud of you, man. I know we haven't talked much, but if you ever want to reconnect, I'm here." Daniel stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Thanks, Liam. Maybe we should grab a drink sometime." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. Daniel was ready to rebuild bridges where it made sense, but on his terms. As the weeks went by, Daniel threw himself into his work and family life with renewed vigor. The company's recovery was well underway, and his personal relationships were healing. He had faced betrayal, public scrutiny, and legal warfare, but he had survived. One night, as he stood on the balcony of his home, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Daniel reflected on the journey he had endured. He was stronger now, more aware of the importance of trust and resilience. The scars Graham had left would remain, but they no longer defined him. This was a new chapter, a chance to build something even greater than before. The months that followed saw Reed and Hayes Industries not only recover but thrive. With Graham out of the picture and new oversight measures in place, the company's reputation steadily rebounded. High-profile partnerships that had been in jeopardy were renegotiated, and major clients reaffirmed their confidence in Daniel's leadership. Shareholders, once wary of the public scandal, now praised the company's resilience. Daniel stood at the forefront of this resurgence. His calm, decisive handling of the crisis became a case study in corporate leadership. Business magazines ran glowing profiles on him, emphasizing how he had turned a near catastrophe into an opportunity for growth. But despite the accolades, Daniel remained grounded. He knew better than anyone how quickly success could be undermined by complacency or misplaced trust. He had learned that hard lesson at the hands of someone he once considered a friend. On a warm spring evening, the company hosted its annual gala, a fitting bookend to the chaos that had begun at the previous year's event. This time, the atmosphere was one of celebration rather than scandal. Employees, partners, and investors mingled under the glittering chandeliers of the Sterling Heights Hotel, their laughter and conversations filled with hope for the future. Daniel arrived with Olivia by his side. She wore an elegant emerald green gown, her confidence fully restored. They were greeted with warm applause as they entered the ballroom, a gesture of appreciation for everything Daniel had done to steer the company through turbulent waters. Margaret Lynn raised her glass during the evening's toast. "To Daniel Reed," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "for leading us through the storm and into calmer waters. Here's to many more years of success and prosperity." The crowd cheered, glasses clinking in unison. Daniel acknowledged the toast with a modest nod. He appreciated the recognition, but he knew that true leadership was about more than accolades. It was about earning and maintaining trust every single day. As the evening wore on, Daniel found himself on the hotel terrace, gazing out over the city skyline. He needed a moment of solitude to reflect on how far he had come. The memories of the past year played in his mind, the betrayal, the anger, the sleepless nights spent plotting his next move. It had been a harrowing journey, but he had emerged stronger and wiser. He wasn't alone for long. Olivia joined him, her heels clicking softly against the stone floor. She handed him a glass of champagne and leaned against the railing beside him. "Thinking deep thoughts again?" she teased gently. "Just taking it all in," Daniel replied with a small smile. "It's been a hell of a year." "That's an understatement," Olivia said, her expression softening. "But you did it. You protected everything you built, our family, the company. You didn't let Graham win." "No, I didn't," Daniel agreed. He took a sip of champagne, savoring the moment. "But I couldn't have done it alone. You stood by me when things were at their worst. That means more to me than you'll ever know." Olivia touched his arm gently. "We're stronger together, Daniel. We always have been." For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt at peace. The fear and doubt that had haunted him were gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. He had fought for his family, his company, and his integrity, and he had won. In the days that followed, Daniel began to embrace a new chapter in his life. He continued mentoring younger executives within the company, teaching them the lessons he had learned through hardship. He emphasized the importance of transparency, accountability, and loyalty, not just to the company, but to themselves and those around them. He also reconnected with people he had distanced himself from during the crisis. True to his word, he met with his brother Liam for drinks. Their conversation was awkward at first, filled with unspoken tensions and regrets. But as the evening progressed, they found common ground. "I know I haven't been the best brother," Liam admitted, swirling his glass of whiskey. "I made a lot of mistakes. But I'm trying to be better." "We both are," Daniel said quietly. "Life has a way of testing you. The important thing is how you come out on the other side." "Here's to new beginnings, then," Liam said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings," Daniel echoed, clinking his glass against Liam's. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. Daniel had come to realize that forgiveness was a journey, not a single act. He was willing to take that journey, on his own terms and at his own pace. At home, Daniel found solace in the simple joys of family life. He took Ben and Sophie to school events, coached their weekend soccer games, and read bedtime stories with Olivia by his side. The children had bounced back from the turmoil, their laughter filling the house once more. One evening, as he tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at him with a serious expression. "Daddy, are the scary people gone now?" she asked. Daniel smiled softly and stroked her hair. "Yes, sweetheart. They're gone. Everything's safe now." "Good," she whispered, snuggling under the covers. "I like it when we're all happy." "So do I," Daniel said quietly. He kissed her forehead and turned off the light. As he walked down the hall to his bedroom, Daniel reflected on her words. Happiness, he realized, wasn't something that just happened. It was something you fought for, protected, and cherished. And after everything he had endured, Daniel was ready to cherish every moment. On the balcony that night, under a canopy of stars, Daniel looked out at the city one last time. He was no longer the man who had stood here months ago, paralyzed by betrayal and doubt. He had rebuilt himself piece by piece, stronger and more determined than ever. This was his life now, one of purpose, resilience, and hope. The future was his to shape, and he intended to make every moment count.